and it's not a barrier. It's the lifeblood of whatever we know as the Big Bend.
Marcos, can I get you to talk? I mean, you know, I know that obviously the park is full of so much beauty, but I wonder when people talk about this idea of, you know, Devil's Playground, what that sounds like to you who spent so much time there in the park.
Well, first I want to back up for just a second because Barney made a comment that was inaccurate when she said that compared to Lawrence's book, hers was boring because it is.
Yeah.
It is a compilation
Well
of some of the finest stories of the Big Bend I've ever read. I recently had some friends that were on their way to Guadalupe, and they said, well, what can you tell us about Guadalupe? And I pulled her book out and I said, read this story right here, God's Country. And that was enough for them, and they took that. And when they handed it back to me, I reread the story of the Candelia workers over there on the river. And then I saw David Alloway's story in there, where rainbows wait for rain. And Robert Hill's account of his first trip down the Rio Grande. And so it's a great book.
You're about to go on.
I'm about to
come here.
He's survived 2 decades in Big Bend National Park, only to.
I told you.
I have fallen further, but to get back to your question, Joe Nick was really touching on something that is really near to my heart here when he was talking about the river and how it really unites all of these areas. And this is something that I have been trying to convey to folks for years, is that a lot of folks don't pick up on this right away, but out there in West Texas, we have more land set aside than the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. It is a huge chunk of land that has been protected in the last 2 decades. And that includes on both sides of the river. You know, we're talking about the Shinati Mountains, El Mezquital, the Ocotillo Wildlife Refuge, Elephant Mountain, the Black Gap Wildlife Management Area, Big Brushy Canyon, the Rio Grande Wild and Scenic River,
Big Bend
Ranch State Park, Big Bend National Park, the Maderas del Carmen Protected Area, the El Campo Reserve, and the Santa Elena Reserve. Huge, 300 million acres of lands that have been set aside and protected in my short, puny little lifetime. And the one thing that they all have in common, all those places that I just mentioned, maybe excluding 1 or 2 like Elephant Mountain, which is a little north, but the one thing that almost all of those areas have in common is that they are united by the river. That is the common thread that weaves through all of them. And there has been recent talk about this binational park, or binational area of interest, or international park, or whatever they choose to call it on that particular day. But what I keep coming back to is that what we really need to do is to be able to manage the river jointly. You know, if we cannot have a binational river, if we cannot, between the United States and Mexico, manage the waters and the natural resources of the Rio Grande jointly, which is where all of these areas come together, then we have no business looking beyond that. And so this is what I promote every time that somebody says anything about a binational area. I say, well, let's back up a little and look at a binational river.
And yet today, you're not supposed to camp on the right side of the river if you're going downstream.
I would just as soon not get into that conversation because I don't believe it's true. I believe that according to the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo that you can camp on either side of the river.
That's why I want to go downstream with you.
I am not a lawyer. I know there are a few out there. So tell me if I'm right or wrong. Treaty trumps law. Is that true or
Any
false?
lawyers want to speak to that?
Well, a treaty is a law, sort of. I mean,
Negative. It is a contractual agreement between two sovereign nations.
but it usually sets up laws.
But anyway, I go by the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. I will go down that river and camp wherever I please. I'm done with that.
Well, I want to cycle back to something, Joe, Nick, you were saying that you know, it's a dangerous area, but of course it's full of, if you know what plants can be helpful, there's all sorts of elements that are there to actually help out a traveler. And Dr. Nelson, in the introduction to your book, which I will agree with Marcos is by no means dull, it's actually a great, great book. And one of the things I liked is the introduction, where you talk about all those plants that were mailed to you in that box. And as I was reading that, I was thinking that you must have, it's true, there are so many plants that are out there that can be helpful. There are also so many plants out there that can be very harmful. And so I wondered if you, I'm sure that you must have a plant that you dislike the most. Probably a cactus of some kind, probably something that's crippled a horse or two.
Lechugia.
And I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I feel certain that you do have a plant out there in the area that you really feel a passionate dislike for.
I guess loco weed would be that plant.
Yeah.
But I'll go back to your other question, because I can't make a big story out of that. About
Well,
the reason I chose the Devil's Playground as part of my title was because, and Marcus and I talked about this at breakfast too, some of us there, we have mixed emotions about tourism, because what tourism really does to a community is create service jobs. You know, somebody to clean the toilet, somebody to make the bed, somebody to serve the food and all that sort of thing. So, you know, we love the Big Bend area, we love the beauty of the mountains, we need the money of tourists coming through and all that sort of thing. But like he said, he didn't want his son to grow up and have a service job. You know, he wanted him to have more opportunities than that, but we want to stay there. And so that's where the Devil's Playground business comes in. It's a mix of what's, you know, there's no good answer. I have no answers. I just bring up questions.
so when you use the term the Devil's Playground, you're thinking more contemporary in terms of
I'm
the
thinking more
challenges
of
that.
devils as tourists or people that.
Tell us what you really think.
Now you see why I didn't want to sign the release.
Has there been an increase in the number of devils that are in the area?
Yes, and these guys are doing it. No, but when, for instance, we have a big chili cook-off there in Terlingua every year. And again, I'm sure people need the money, and it's a good thing. But people that come kind of tend to feel like they can do anything they want to do in our part of the world. You know, they can leave their manners behind. They can come out there and just have sex, you know, put on a white T-shirt and have somebody spray them with water. Well, we don't act that way. Or maybe Marcus does. I don't know.
Well, not to split hairs, but that's all behind the store. And the Cassie folks are different.
I've never been, so.
I did. One year I got to judge, and my friend Kirby Warnock came and judged. He judged behind the store, and I went to Cassie, and it was terrible that. And I've judged Wild Hog. I still do the Go Cook Off up in Brady, but tepid chili at 4 in the afternoon after you've been around all these drunks, and you're feeling a little fuzzy yourself, is not my idea of a good time. And then when I went and picked up Kirby, everybody was still flashing. They were yeehawing, and it looked like it was a lot more fun there. But those cook-offs is what really started modern tourism in a lot of ways in that part in the Terlingua area. Back when H. Allen Smith and Frank X. Tolbert were doing newspaper columns and throwing down challenges, and you know, it must have been fun for them the first time or two. But what I saw at that when I went a few years ago is kind of like after the first few years of South by Southwest this year, and it's like, you know, I don't know, the crowds are a little bit too much, and It's a little too regimented wildness. If I want to have a good time, I'd rather do it with a handful of people.
So, Marcos, I mean, you're in an interesting situation because I'm sure that you must, to some extent, share some of what Dr. Nelson's complaints are about hordes of people coming in and acting crazy and all that. But on the other hand, part of your job has been to help those people find their way in the park and to get them out of trouble when they get into trouble. So, do you share her view of the kind of the ambivalence toward the folks from the outside coming in?
I don't have any ambivalence, but I do agree with some of the things that she's saying. And what we were speaking about this morning is really the need to have a more diverse economy in an area like the Big Bend. That, we cannot and should not put all of our eggs in the tourism basket. We need to develop other cottage industries and businesses and things that provide some better employment opportunities for folks. Tourism should be one component of our economy there. And I don't think that Barney or I, either one, like to see everything concentrated on a tourism-based industry there. There are some works that have been done in other areas. There's a book called Balancing Nature and Commerce in the Gateway Communities that was done by the Sonoran Institute some years back, and it looks at this problem of gateway communities where people are coming in and developing these areas, and what you end up with is a service. Well, here's a great example: is Jackson Hole, Wyoming.
You're going to say Jackson.
Where the people who were born and raised there now live in Driggs because they can no longer afford the taxes or the houses there in Jackson Hole, and the only thing they have to go back there for is service industry jobs. Mm-hmm. And so I'm hoping that the folks there in our local government will have the foresight to see that we need to have a little more diverse economy.
Lawrence, I want to throw that over to you because you've worked as a photographer in a lot of these so-called gateway communities around the country, around the world. I mean, you've taken photographs in so many of these places. I wonder if some of the things that Marcos is talking about are things you recognize from some of the other national parks that and the communities around them that you've worked in.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Tourists are a blessing and a curse. It's kind of a mixed deal. They do bring in money and jobs, and maybe not the greatest jobs, but it might be better than no jobs. If you grew up around there, that's maybe better than nothing. People, maybe a few think Big Bend's overrun with tourists, but those people have not been to Yellowstone or Yosemite or Great Smokies and Fall Color or some of the things I've kind of held my nose and made myself do. It took me a long time. I've shot in about every national park over the years. It took me a long time before I braved Yosemite, and my wife and I finally said, okay, we got to battle the crowds and go. So we went. And actually, it's a beautiful place. I'm glad we went. I've been back since. But Big Bend actually is pretty quiet. It's a big park and not a lot of people. And if you don't go at spring break or between Christmas and New Year's, it's generally not too bad. I don't think Big Bend's in danger of being overwhelmed with tourists. I actually, these days, am somewhat concerned. You kind of hear the endless news pieces that the national parks are being loved to death. But actually, overall, system-wide, national park tourism has been falling steadily for years. I guess because of changing demographics, changing lifestyle. People would rather play video games. I don't know. They can see the park on the internet. Why go? I mean, I don't know. But it's tough. Jackson, Wyoming is probably the quintessential over-the-top case, which is why I thought you'd say. Plus, of course, we've met up there before when you've been stationed up there. But I don't know. It is nice to have a more diverse economy. I grew up in large part of Carlsbad Caverns, and Carlsbad was sort of the gateway community, and tourism was part of it, but they also had potash mining and oil and gas and ranching, so it was not near as one-sided a community. Jackson, Wyoming, either you're in a service job or you're a multimillionaire and you just come in and spend a few weeks there a year in your trophy house. I mean, that's sort of Jackson, Wyoming, but not that it's not a beautiful place, and I can see why people would want their trophy house there. But